Ladies and gentlemen, the hype train for Ryzen 8000, also known as Granite Ridge, which of course will be powered by Zen 5, is really starting to pick up a lot of momentum, especially over the past month or so. In fact, over the last day, there have been a bunch of new specifications with clarification to core count, power consumption, and caches which have actually leaked online. I want to go through some of this stuff with you because we actually have now more solid information concerning AMD's plans for the desktop. So, this info comes to us via PCGamesHardware.de. I want to start things out with a couple of code names. So, the CCDs are known as Eldora, and the CPU cores as Nirvana. As far as I understand, this information is 100% correct. But the CPU core count will be 6 to 16. Now, if you're a regular viewer of the channel, you'll know that I've said this almost, I don't know, hundreds of times at this point, that AMD will be retaining the same core count as what we currently have with, let's say, the Ryzen 7000 series. I had heard some very early rumors that maybe AMD would be raising the core count, but this is almost certainly not going to be the case. So there will be variants of Zen 5, which will have higher core counts on the CCDs, but these will basically be server-based products and utilizing basically Zen 5 Dense or Zen 5C, and this is not going to be the same variant that comes to desktop. So basically it will still be 8 cores per CCD. Lower end of course will also be the same, and this, given the IPC gains and stuff, which I'll get more into in a moment, is still going to be a very compelling product over Zen 4. Power consumption is also going to be 65 to 170 watts. Again, I am pretty certain this information is correct. AMD will not want to release a product which is massively high because, again, it is using the AM5 platform, so of course there needs to be motherboard compatibility, as well as the fact that ultimately you don't really want to go through a stress and a headache for the end user in terms of actually cooling the thing. So 170 watts, just for a lot of different reasons, which are too numerous to really go through in this video. So 170 watts is just logical for numerous reasons, some of which are pretty obvious. But moving on to the cache information, so up to 64 megabytes of L3 cache and 16 megabytes of L2 cache. So this, of course, would be the full configuration. So L2 cache, as most of you know, is, of course, on each core, so each core gets its own unique L2 cache. Now, as far as I personally understand, this has been basically set to 1 megabyte. Jim over at Adore TV did put out a video where he said that there were higher cache configuration variants which were tested. I believe it was 2 and 3 megabytes. I don't have the notes in front of me, so if I'm wrong on that, please feel free to correct me in the comments down below. And this offered up to a 7% gain in terms of IPC, but to my understanding, based upon sources that I've spoken to, this is true. They did test it internally, but they basically decided, for a lot of different reasons, including things like die size and other bits and bobs, that it just wasn't worth it. All of this extra space for 7% IPC, they basically just said, you know what, we're just going to keep to 1 megabyte per core. So it's identical essentially to the previous generation. However, L1 cache is larger. Now, this is where my personal opinion starts to come in. I do think that most likely Jim's info of the kind of laddered L3 cache is probably right. I've honestly heard mixed things about L3. It's going to be very interesting. I had heard quite early on that there were a lot of unique things that AMD were doing with the L3 cache, so it's going to be very interesting to hear exactly what in reality they do when, of course, they formally disclose the architecture. But this is where, in my opinion, things start to well, at least my information starts to diverge from PCGamesHardware.de. Now, obviously, at the end of the day, I do not have Lisa Sue calling me, in the evening and giving me all of the information. So my info could be BS and their info could be right, but I'm relatively confident that what I'm about to say is correct. I do not think that the desktop variant will be using TSMC's N3 processor, which is what they claim. I think it is on the 4nm process, and I think that certain server variants, for example, those will be on 3nm. So again, I think that Ryzen desktop is on 4nm, and server will be on the 3nm. So I think, again, just to clarify, I think Ryzen for the desktop will be on the 4nm process. There will be some mobile variants which will basically split across both 3 as well as 4nm depending on the product segment, in other words how high up the performance ladder you go. And as for server, there will be some variants like the dense Zen 5s which will be built on 3nm. Now the release is quite interesting. They claim it's the second half of 2024. I gotta tell you guys, I've actually heard it's the first half. I've received a lot of conflicting information whether it's the first or second quarter. I'm going to be pessimistic and say it's the second quarter, because honestly I've heard both things and I can't get a definitive answer. Hopefully I can give you guys an update on that, but I do not think that AMD will be waiting until the second half of 2024. Obviously it's possible I am wrong, but I don't think so. The past couple of generations, Ryzen 4000 for example, I believe that launched in September. Ryzen 5000 I think was when was it? I'm just checking. That was November. But Ryzen 3000 that launched in July, and Ryzen 1000 I think, I'm just doing this in real time, I should have probably done this a little earlier, that launched in March. So basically their time frames are kind of all over the shop historically. Last couple of generations it's been later on in the year, but they've also had some precedent for early in the year. So basically the Ryzen 1000 series launched in March 2017, so that's about 6 years ago now, but the initial announcement was in December 2016. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all of this starts to form in terms of their release date. Obviously, there will also be the Zen 5 V-Cache variants, and of course they will almost certainly come a little later. I would love for AMD to not do this. I would love for them to just release the V-Cache variants simultaneous to the, vanilla versions, but I don't think they will. As for the IPC gains, this is where things start to become a lot messier, because you have to basically decide, well, how are you calculating IPC? Obviously, there's a lot of different ways you can do that, like different tests, that type of thing. But I've heard from multiple sources now it's between 20 and 25% 1T. Some people are being more bullish, it's slightly more than 25%, but I personally, when it comes to things like IPC, I typically prefer to be pessimistic, especially now, because obviously things can just not happen. As you can see on screen, I've also placed a Granite Ridge AM5 Ryzen slide that I've released previously. This is back when Jim released his video. I also think SMT2 is correct. I don't think there's a huge clock frequency gain either, so it's going to be very interesting. As you may know, Intel will be releasing their Raptor Lake refresh, which is essentially the same thing, albeit with higher clock frequencies. I've heard around 10, maybe 15% higher gains in clock frequency. The caches basically are identical. Obviously, there will be some changes in power consumption, but there's no major differences in architecture. Higher core counts for the mid-range, I've heard as well, is probably going to happen with Raptor Lake, but it's going to be Meteor Lake as well as, the successors, where AMD really come under a lot of pressure from Intel. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Intel actually market Raptor Lake refresh, and of course the subsequent architectures, especially given the onslaught, quite frankly, to the desktop that they will be facing off against with Zen 5. With that said, guys, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. It's YouTube. I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.